Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV. I finally got my hands on my Analogue 3D that I ordered over a year ago. It just came in today. If you're not familiar with this is a Nintendo 64 replica console. It will play all of the Nintendo 64 cartridges on your modern display. At the moment, it is the best way, in my opinion, to play Nintendo 64 games on a modern display without modding your original hardware. And these are niche devices that are beautifully constructed. It really feels like a premium product. And one of the issues that you run into with these analog devices is that if you don't buy them right when they come out, you'll never get them because they tend to just never make them again after an initial run or two. So this is the time to buy if you are looking for one of these. And because this has been out now for a week or two and everybody's already done a review on it, what I thought I would do in this video is focus in on some of the compatibility issues that some folks have noted, namely the issues with flash cartridges. I'm going to try out my Summercart here along with an Everdrive. There were some updates that Crix made on the Everdrive that might make things work better for us. We'll also take a look at another device that is modern but is designed for the original hardware. This is a blue retro device, even though it's red, that allows you to use things like modern controllers and mice with your Nintendo 64. We're going to see if this works on here as well. And if the flash cartridges do work, we're going to try some other stuff with them, including loading up 64DD games on this too, the 64 disc system. So we'll have some fun today, kind of exploring some things that weren't done on those other reviews, and I'll put links to some of my favorite reviews down in the video description. Even GameSack made the list there. Now, I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that I paid for this with my own funds, so this is not a sponsored review. All of the opinions you're about to hear are my own, and no one has reviewed or approved what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what this thing can do with our flash cartridges and some other stuff. So we're going to start off with some level setting here, and we're going to try out these flash cartridges on the original hardware so you can see how everything is supposed to work first, and then we'll try it on the analog. Now, of note here, my Everdrive is an older one. This is the V2 Everdrive, not the current version. The current one just got a firmware update, I think today or yesterday, to allow it to work with the 3D. The only caveat is that you have to update the firmware using original Nintendo 64 hardware. I would imagine you probably have Nintendo 64 hardware kicking around, otherwise you wouldn't have the cart. But just keep that in mind. You will need that in order to get that cartridge up to date. Now, on original hardware here, as I switch it on, you will see that you get a menu when you first load this thing up, and then you can go in and load games up. What I'm going to do first here is just load up a Homebrew game to see how this works. This is a game that was written in modern times called Styx. It looks pretty cool. And as you can see here, this is the process. You put the cartridge in, you load up the game you want to play, and you're off and running. The games are stored on an SD card that you insert into the cartridge. And generally, it works just like you see here, no issues. This does support save games, not save states, but if you have a game that saves your progress, it will save it to the SD card for safekeeping, and we're going to try to test that out in a little bit too. So that is how the Everdrive works if you have one of those. And then for the Summercart here, there's a couple things that I want to look at. We'll look at, of course, the basic cartridge loading, which you can do here. So I'll load up Wave Race, for example, and this will load the game up and it will function as you would expect. And of course, the Summercart, which I reviewed a little while back, was working fine on original hardware a few months ago. It's still working the same way now. I'm going to go ahead here and just hit the reset button. I think this will bring us back to the menu. Now, one neat thing about the Summercart is that it will also allow you to run 64 disk system games, otherwise known as the 64DD, on your hardware, even if you don't have the disk drive unit. And what we can do here, for example, is go over to F0 here and then go into this disk image for the expansion pack. And if I hold down the Z button here after loading both of these things in, my American hardware here can load up in essentially hardware emulation on the built-in cartridge here, the disk system, and I can run the F0 expansion. And some community members actually translated the expansion into English here so I can actually read what's going on. And you get additional features and tracks that were not in the original. So we're going to test this out on the new system also to see if it's able to do that. And one last thing I want to try out here is this blue retro device that allows you to use Bluetooth devices with your Nintendo 64. So for example, I've got Mario Paint loaded up from the 64 disk system here, and I'm able to use this 8BitDo Bluetooth mouse with the Blue Retro and get mouse functionality inside of this game, which is pretty neat. So this is all stuff that you can do with modern hardware on the original hardware, and it adds a lot of new things to what you were familiar with growing up. So now, why don't we switch over to the analog system and see what works and what doesn't. All right, so why don't we boot up our analog console now. I do have the cartridge inserted here, so we'll hit the button. Now, unlike an original Nintendo 64, this has to boot up an operating system first, and then it goes into the game. I did update the Analogue to its most recent firmware when I took it out of the box a little bit earlier. So this is all up to date here. And we've got the Everdrive just as it was configured before. It definitely doesn't come up as quickly as it does on the original hardware here. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like it has detected the cartridge. Why don't we pop it out and pop it back in and see if it picks it up again? And it doesn't. So it looks like this version 2 Everdrive with the latest firmware is just not compatible with this device. So this might just be too old to get working, which is a bummer. And you might be asking, well, Lon, the Analogue 3D has an SD card slot on it. Why can't you just load the games off of an SD card? And the reason is that out of the box, this doesn't support that. Although what usually happens with these analog consoles is that out of nowhere, a jailbreak OS appears, and that lets you do those things. So I'm sure this will happen to this console in the very near future. But right now, you do need a flash cartridge if you want to load in games that you can't afford or you want to play Homebrew. So why don't we plug the Summercart in and see if we do any better. This one is getting recognized, which is good. So why don't we go ahead here and boot it up. And what we're going to see here is the menu. So that's a good step in the right direction. And what I want to do first here is load up Wave Race 64 because I want to see if I can save a game onto the cartridge here. I was hearing from some folks that save games were a little on the difficult side, but it looks like the game here is booting up just fine. So let me go in and get to a point where I can save the game, and we'll see if it is able to write out to the cartridge as expected. So I just played through a Wave Race time trial. Believe it or not, my old controller here is still working actually, better than I had expected it to work. And if I go in now to the menu and look at the records, we should see my save game there. And I should note that I got the record, I put my name in, and then I shut down the console and rebooted everything. So hopefully my name will still be in there, which it is. So it looks like the Summercart is saving games properly. I also pulled out my controller pack here to make sure it wasn't actually saving on this. And for good measure, I copied the save game onto the controller pack, and that worked as well. So far, it seems like if you got a game that saves on cart or on the controller pack, it should work on the Summercart. So why don't we push things a little bit further here now. And what we're going to do is load up some of the disk system games. And so what I just did here is I loaded in my F-Zero ROM. Now we're going to load in the F-Zero expansion disk image. And then what I do here is push the Z button, and this will load both of these things up together. And this is really pushing compatibility here, right? Because if this is compatible with the original hardware, all of this stuff should work. And look at that. It looks like we've got the 64DD thing going here. Why don't we do a quick race? And I should be able to select the expansion games. Like here's a DD1 Cup. And so what we'll do is just select this real quick, and this will give us one of the expansion tracks. So it has to load that track, not off the ROM, but off the disk image. So we'll let that do its thing here, and it looks like it's loading up just fine and playing just fine. One thing to note on the Analogue 3D is that it defaults to having scan lines. You can turn them off, but a lot of these 64 games were designed with a CRT television in mind, and they've got a couple of different scan line configurations that you can configure things with. But by default, it's going to have scan lines, and that was their choice for this. So if you want a cleaner image, you will have to go in and adjust some things. And on that note, if I hit the reset button here and go back to the top here, let me turn it off and back on again, you can configure the Analogue 3D here on a game-by-game basis, but the Summercart is considered to be a single game. So if you wanted to have scan lines for one game and not scan lines for the other, you would have to go in and configure that each time before you load the game up, with regular cartridges, it does keep a record of every game that you've put in and allows you to set settings based on that specific cartridge. But because it sees this as a single game, even though there's a lot of games inside of it, you have to go into this configuration menu and adjust the display every single time. All right, before we close out, let's take a look and see if the Homebrew game runs on this now. So again, we're on the Summercart. We've got sticks here. We're going to load this up and see what happens. And it looks like that is working too. So yeah, it looks like we've got ourselves a functional system here with the Summercart. I'm going to hang on to my Analogue 3D for a little while. Believe it or not, the Nintendo 64 was never something I was hugely into. I did have one briefly. What happened back in 1996 is that my dad got one for my little brother, and he didn't want my brother to find it before the holidays. So I had it for like 2 months up in my dorm room when I was still in college. So I played a lot of Wave Race and Star Wars and Mario 64, but around that time I was more into the PlayStation and PC games and didn't really spend all that much time on the Nintendo 64. But I do believe, and this is I got no source for this information, just speculation, that we will see a jailbreak firmware for this device that will allow for us to load games off of the SD card slot in the back, and that might also introduce additional compatibility with other systems. We've seen this before with their prior devices. That includes the Analogue Pocket, along with all of the other consoles they've made over the last 8 or 9 years or so. They've all gotten some kind of unofficial firmware that extends functionality dramatically. So once that happens, and I suspect it will, I will do a follow-up here and see what else we can do with this thing. But in the meantime, if you don't have a lot of physical cartridges or you really want to explore some of the homebrew that's out there, it looks like the Summercart is working here without issue. Everything seems to work, including some of the crazier stuff like the 64DD compatibility. Now, one note about the Summercart is that they're not made by a single manufacturer. These things are all from an open source design, and a bunch of Chinese companies just crank them out. So some are better than others. I will try to find some reputable ones that I can put in the video description, but you may end up with a dud, so just be aware of that. They are cheap, but I would suggest getting them from a place that supports returns, easy returns, in case you get a bad one. The Everdrives are much more reliable. Crix, who makes these, is already putting the new firmware on the new Everdrive, so you'll be getting out-of-the-box compatibility now, at least as of today. But the older one, like I have here, doesn't work. So if you bought one like I did a number of years ago, it'll work on your original hardware, of course, but not on the Analogue 3D. I will be back with more on this if that jailbreak firmware comes out, as I would expect it will. And I may come back and do a retrospective on all of the Analogue consoles that I've been accumulating over the years. They're all like collector's items now, because as nice as they are, they don't make a lot of them. And once they get them out there, that's usually about it. So this is a short-lived kind of thing, but it's a very high-quality short-lived kind of thing. And again, I'll come back and talk about it a bit more in the future. Let me know what you'd like to see in the video comments below. And until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.